We should kick this old woman out!
She was 73 years old, lying on frozen ground, covered in snow, with no one coming to save her. The same children she had fed from her own plate, the same grandchildren she had raised with her own hands, they were all posting vacation photos while she was dying alone in the cold. And the only person who would eventually find her that night was a lost 15-year-old boy she had never met, walking through a dark forest because he heard a voice telling him to keep moving toward a light he couldn't explain. This is not a story about abandonment. This is not even a story about rescue. This is a story about what happens when everything you believed about family falls apart and something greater than blood shows up exactly when you need it most. If you listen carefully, you will understand something by the end of this story that will change the way you see the people around you. You will understand that the ones who are supposed to love you are not always the ones who will save you. You will understand that prayers are heard even when the wind is louder than your voice. And you will understand that sometimes the strangest miracles arrive wearing the most unexpected faces. My name is not important in this story. What matters is that I heard it from Alina Castillo herself in a small hospital room in February when she was finally strong enough to speak about what happened to her. She told me every detail with eyes that had seen betrayal but also grace. She told me about her children, about the cold, about the boy who found her, and about the warmth she felt when she was certain she was about to die. I promised her I would tell this story because she said the world needed to hear it. She said people needed to know that God still moves in the darkness, that he still sends strangers when families fail, and that no one is ever truly forgotten, even when it feels that way. So let me take you back to where this began. Not to the night Alina fell on the frozen ground, but years before, when her life looked completely different. Alina Castillo was born in a small town in Mexico, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and families stayed close across generations. She was the youngest of 4 daughters, raised by a mother who baked bread every morning and a father who worked the land with his hands until they were rough as tree bark. She learned early that love was not about words. It was about showing up, again and again, even when life made it hard. She married at 21. His name was Roberto, and he had kind eyes and calloused hands just like her father. They moved to the United States when she was 26, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a dream of giving their future children a better life than the one they had known. They worked every job they could find. Roberto drove trucks and later worked construction. Alina cleaned houses, cooked for families, sewed clothes on the side. They saved every penny. Their first child, a daughter named Lucia, was born when Alina was 28. Then came Miguel 2 years later, then the youngest, a son named Carlos. The 3 children filled the house with noise and chaos and joy. Alina made their lunches every morning. She stayed up late sewing their school uniforms when they couldn't afford new ones. She sold her only gold bracelet, a gift from her mother, to pay for Lucia's quinceañera dress. When Miguel wanted to join the soccer team but they couldn't afford the fees, she took on extra cleaning jobs and hid the exhaustion from her children. She never wanted them to feel poor. She wanted them to feel loved. And Roberto, bless him, he worked just as hard. He woke before sunrise and came home after sunset, his body aching, his hands cracked and bleeding in the winters. But every Friday night, no matter how tired he would sit at the dinner table and tell the children stories about Mexico, about their grandparents, about the old house with the mango tree in the backyard. He made them laugh. He made them feel like they came from something beautiful. Years passed the way years do when you're too busy surviving to notice. The children grew. Lucia got married young, at 19, to a man named David who had a good job at a factory. Miguel went to college, the first in their family to do so, and Alina cried on the day he graduated because her son had become something she never imagined. Carlos, the youngest, was always the dreamer. He wanted to start his own business, something with cars, a repair shop, maybe eventually a dealership. He had the ambition, but not the money. One night, Carlos came to Alina and Roberto with a proposal. He needed capital to start the business. He had found a small garage for sale, and with a little investment, he believed he could turn it into something great. He didn't have the credit to get a loan on his own. He was only 23. Roberto and Alina looked at each other across the kitchen table. They didn't speak out loud, but they didn't have to. They had a small piece of land back in Mexico, a countryside house that Roberto's parents had left them years ago. It wasn't worth much, but it was theirs. It was supposed to be their retirement plan, their safety net, the place they always said they would return to one day when they were too old to work. They mortgaged the house. They gave Carlos everything they had saved. And when he hugged Alina and whispered, "One day I'll pay you back, Mom, I promise," she believed him completely. The business did well. Carlos was smart, and he worked hard, and within a few years, the repair shop grew into something respectable. But something else was growing too, something Alina didn't see at first because she was too busy being proud. Something was changing in her children. Lucia had 2 children of her own now, twin girls named Sofia and Camilla. Then she had a son, Rafael. Miguel got married and had 2 daughters, Isabella and Natalia. The grandchildren became Alina's whole world. She babysat them constantly, sometimes all 5 at once while their parents worked. She fed them, bathed them, told them the same stories Roberto used to tell. She taught Sofia how to make tamales. She walked Camilla to school every morning for 3 years. She held Rafael when he cried at night because he was scared of the dark. She became more than a grandmother. She became their second mother. And somewhere in those years of giving, the children stopped saying thank you. It happened slowly, the way erosion happens, so gradual you don't notice until the cliff has already crumbled. Lucia started calling only when she needed something. Miguel would visit but spend the whole time on his phone. Carlos, despite his success, never mentioned the mortgage again. The words "I'll pay you back" faded into silence, and Alina never brought it up because she didn't want to seem demanding. She told herself that family didn't keep score. She told herself that one day, when she and Roberto needed help, her children would be there for them the way she had always been there for them. Then Roberto got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then shortness of breath, then the diagnosis that felt like a bomb going off in the middle of their living room. Lung cancer. Stage 4. The doctors said they could try treatment, but they should prepare for the worst. Alina didn't fall apart. She couldn't afford to. She became his nurse, his cook, his constant companion. She held his hand through every chemotherapy session. She learned to administer medication at home. She slept in a chair beside his hospital bed during the long nights when he couldn't rest. She watched the man she had loved for 50 years become weaker and thinner and more tired, and she prayed every single day that God would give them more time. The children came sometimes, but not often. Lucia said she was busy with the twins' activities. Miguel had a demanding job, he couldn't take time off. Carlos sent money for the medical bills, which Alina was grateful for, but she noticed he never stayed long when he visited. The grandchildren, the same ones she had raised like her own, rarely came at all. They were teenagers now with their own lives, their own priorities. Sofia and Camilla had homework. Rafael had soccer practice. Isabella and Natalia were always with their friends. Roberto died on a Tuesday morning in March. Alina was holding his hand when he took his last breath. She had been telling him about the mango tree in Mexico, about how maybe one day they would go back and sit in its shade. His eyes were closed, but she saw him smile just before the end. Then he was gone, and the room felt like all the air had been sucked out of it. The funeral was beautiful. All 3 children gave speeches about what a wonderful father Roberto had been. They cried. They hugged Alina. They told her how sorry they were. And for a moment, she believed that maybe now, after losing their father, they would finally come together as a family again. She was wrong. The fighting started within a week of Roberto's death. Alina didn't understand it at first. There were whispered conversations in the kitchen that stopped whenever she entered. There were phone calls taken in other rooms. She saw Lucia and Miguel talking quietly in the backyard, their faces tense, their voices hushed. When she asked what was going on, they said it was nothing, just family matters, nothing for her to worry about. But she worried. One night, she heard them more clearly than they intended. She was walking to the bathroom when she passed the living room and heard her name. "The property papers are in her name," Miguel was saying. "But legally, we're entitled to something, right? Dad put money into this house, too." "She's old," Lucia said. "She doesn't need this much space. We should convince her to sign the house over now before anything happens to her." "And what about the land in Mexico?" Carlos asked. That's technically still hers too, even though I was the one who made it valuable by actually using the money. Alina stopped walking. She stood in the hallway, invisible, listening to her children divide up her life like it was a pie at a dinner party. They talked about her the way people talk about problems to be solved, obstacles to be managed. Not once did any of them mention what she might want. Not once did they consider asking her. She went back to her room and cried silently into her pillow, the same pillow Roberto used to sleep on, and she wondered how the babies she had nursed had become these strangers. Over the following months, the hints became demands. Lucia suggested that Alina might be happier in a smaller place, somewhere with less upkeep, less responsibility. Miguel mentioned that he had a friend who was a real estate agent, just in case Alina ever wanted to explore her options. Carlos, during one of his rare visits, casually brought up the countryside house in Mexico, asking if Alina had thought about what she wanted to do with it. Alina wanted to scream at them. She wanted to remind them of every sacrifice she had made, every meal she had cooked, every night she had stayed awake so they could sleep. She wanted to show them the old photograph she kept in her drawer, the one of her selling her mother's bracelet, and ask them if they remembered why she had done it. But she didn't scream. She just nodded and said she would think about it, hoping that if she gave them time, they would remember who she was and what she deserved. They held the family meeting on a Thursday evening in October. Alina wasn't invited. She sat in her bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of discussion coming from the living room. She heard raised voices, then quiet voices, then laughter, which somehow hurt worse than the shouting. After 2 hours, Lucia came to her room with a gentle knock and a gentle smile. "Mom," she said, sitting on the edge of Alina's bed, "we've all been talking, and we think it might be good for you to spend some time at the countryside house. You know, get some fresh air, some peace and quiet. You've been through so much with Dad's passing. A change of scenery might help." Alina looked at her daughter's face and saw something she had never seen there before. She saw calculation. She saw impatience. She saw a woman who had already made a decision and was now performing the kindness that would make her feel better about it. "For how long?" Alina asked. "Just for a while," Lucia said. "We'll visit every weekend. The grandchildren miss you. They'd love to come see you in the country." Alina knew it was a lie. She knew it in her bones the way she knew when rain was coming or when bread was ready to come out of the oven. But she also knew that fighting would change nothing. Her children had already decided. They wanted the house. They wanted her gone. And maybe, some small part of her whispered, maybe if she gave them what they wanted, they would finally love her again. 2 weeks later, they packed her bags. Carlos drove her in his truck, the same truck he had bought with the money from the business she had helped him start. The countryside house was 3 hours from the city, down narrow roads that twisted through hills and forests. Alina hadn't been there in almost 20 years. The last time was with Roberto, before the children were born, when they used to talk about retiring there one day. The house was smaller than she remembered. The paint was peeling. The garden had grown wild. But it was hers, at least in name, and she told herself that maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe the fresh air would help. Maybe the children would visit like they promised. Carlos helped her carry her bags inside. He showed her how to work the old gas stove, pointed out where the fuse box was in case the power went out, left her a list of emergency numbers. Before he left, he hugged her and said, "Take care, Mom. We'll see you next weekend." She watched his truck disappear down the dirt road, and then she was alone. The first weekend, nobody came. She called Lucia, who apologized and said something had come up with the twins. She called Miguel, who didn't answer. She called Carlos, who texted back that he was swamped with work but would definitely come the next weekend. The next weekend came and went, and the next after that. Alina stopped calling after the first month. She couldn't bear the excuses anymore, the cheerful lies wrapped in busy schedules. She sat in the quiet house and watched dust collect on surfaces she once would have cleaned obsessively. She cooked small meals for one and ate them standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the empty dining table felt too lonely. She walked through the overgrown garden and talked to Roberto's ghost, telling him about the birds she saw and the weather and the way the sunsets still looked the same as they had 40 years ago. Loneliness is not just an emotion. It is a physical sensation, a weight that presses down on your chest and makes it harder to breathe with each passing day. Alina felt it settle into the walls of the house like mold, invisible but pervasive. She felt it in the silence of the mornings when she woke up and remembered there was no one to talk to. She felt it in the evenings when the darkness came early and she sat by the window watching for headlights that never appeared on the road. She started checking her grandchildren's social media accounts, something she had never done before. She had to ask a neighbor to show her how to use the phone properly, how to find the apps, how to search for names. And then she saw them. Sophia posting pictures from a beach vacation with friends, her smile bright and careless. Camilla celebrating her 16th birthday at a fancy restaurant, surrounded by family, everyone laughing. Raphael at a concert, arms raised, joy on his face. Isabella and Natalia at a Christmas party, wearing matching red dresses. Alina was in none of the pictures. Her name was mentioned in none of the captions. It was as if she had never existed, as if the woman who had raised them, fed them, loved them, had simply vanished into the walls of a house 3 hours away. She put the phone down and wept. December came with an unusual cold. The countryside, usually mild even in winter, was gripped by freezing temperatures that made Alina's old bones ache. She wore 3 sweaters inside the house and kept the fireplace burning constantly, but the cold still found its way in through the cracks in the windows, through the gaps under the doors. She worried about the pipes freezing. She worried about running out of firewood. She worried, more than anything, about what would happen if something went wrong, and there was no one to help. The storm began on a Thursday evening. Alina watched through the window as the sky turned gray, then dark, then black with clouds that swallowed the mountains in the distance. The wind started as a whisper and grew into a howl. Snow began falling, first gently, then fiercely, covering the ground in white faster than she had ever seen. By evening, the power went out. Alina lit candles and sat by the fire, listening to the storm rage outside. She wasn't afraid, not yet. She had lived through storms before. But there was something different about this one, something that made her feel small and vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt since she was a child. Around 8 o'clock, she heard a banging sound. At first, she thought it was the wind rattling the shutters, but it was too rhythmic, too consistent. She realized it was the wooden gate at the front of the property, the old gate that Roberto had built decades ago. The latch must have come loose in the storm. She knew she should leave it. Going outside in this weather was foolish. But the banging was driving her mad, each slam like a reminder that everything was falling apart, that even the things Roberto had built were failing now that he was gone. She pulled on her thickest coat, wrapped a scarf around her head, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her like a wall. It stole her breath and made her eyes water instantly. The snow was coming down so heavily that she could barely see the gate 20 feet away. She held onto the porch railing and carefully made her way down the 2 steps, feeling for the ground with her feet because she couldn't see it through the white. She reached the gate and fumbled with the latch, her fingers already numb inside her gloves. The wind whipped her scarf off her head and sent it flying into the darkness. She cursed, grabbed the gate with both hands, and finally managed to push the latch into place. The banging stopped. For a moment, she felt a small triumph. She had done it. She was still capable of taking care of herself, still capable of surviving alone. Then she turned to go back inside. Her foot slid on the ice beneath the snow. She felt her leg go out from under her, felt herself falling backward, felt the impossible slowness of the moment when you know something terrible is about to happen and cannot stop it. She hit the ground hard, her hip striking first, a bolt of pain shooting through her body so intense that she screamed, but the wind swallowed the sound before it traveled 10 feet. She tried to get up. Her arms pushed against the frozen ground, but when she tried to move her right leg, the pain flared so bright that her vision went white. She fell back down, gasping, tears already forming in her eyes. She was lying on the ground, halfway between the gate and the porch, with snow falling on her face and wind cutting through her coat like it wasn't there. Her phone was inside the house, on the kitchen counter, impossibly far away. The nearest neighbor lived at least 4 miles down the road. No one was expecting her. No one would know she was missing. For the first few minutes, she told herself to stay calm. Someone would come. Something would happen. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, as the cold crept from her feet up her legs and into her core, as the snow began to cover her body in a thin white layer that thickened with each passing moment, she understood with terrible clarity that no one was coming. No one even knew she was out here. She tried shouting. She screamed as loud as she could, screamed until her throat was raw, but the storm ate her voice. The wind was louder than she could ever be. The darkness was absolute. No lights anywhere, no sign of life anywhere, just the endless white of snow and the endless black of night. Her fingers went numb first, then her toes, then her hands, her feet, her arms, her legs. The cold was not sharp anymore. It was heavy, like a blanket pressing down on her, like the weight of water in a deep pool. She remembered reading somewhere that hypothermia made you feel warm right before it killed you. She wondered if that was what was happening now. She thought about Roberto. She thought about the day they met, about their wedding, about the birth of each child, about the decades they had spent building a life together. She thought about her parents, long dead, waiting for her somewhere she couldn't see. She thought about the mango tree in her childhood home, the way the sun used to come through its leaves in patterns on the ground. She thought about her children, and for the first time in months, she felt no anger, only sorrow. Only a deep, aching wish that things had been different, that somehow she had done something differently, that she had been enough for them to love her the way she had loved them. Tears froze on her cheeks. She could feel them turning to ice, tiny crystals forming on her skin. She was so tired. The cold was making her sleepy, pulling her down toward something soft and dark that waited beneath consciousness. It would be so easy to close her eyes and let go. But something inside her resisted. A voice, not her own, speaking from the part of her soul that had prayed every night of her life since she was a little girl. The voice that had whispered through decades of hardship, through poverty and exhaustion and grief and now abandonment. The voice that still believed, against all evidence, that she was not alone. She spoke out loud, her words barely a whisper, her lips cracked and frozen. God, I don't want to die like this. Not here, not alone. If you can see me, please, please send someone. Please don't let me die forgotten. The wind howled, the snow fell, the darkness pressed in from all sides. And then silence. Not the silence of the storm ending, but a silence that seemed to come from inside her, a sudden stillness in the chaos that made no physical sense. She felt something, a warmth spreading through her chest, starting at her heart and radiating outward. It was not the warmth of hypothermia, the false warmth that came before death. It was something else. It was like a hand, gentle and invisible, pressing against her heart and saying, I am here. She heard a voice, not with her ears, but somewhere deeper in the place where prayers lived and memories were kept. The voice was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was simply present, simply certain, simply true. Hold on, help is coming. Elena didn't know if she was hallucinating. She didn't know if her brain was shutting down and creating comfort in its final moments. But the voice felt real in a way that nothing else did. It felt like Roberto's hand in hers during those last days. It felt like her mother's arms around her when she was small. It felt like being held by something vast and kind that would not let her fall. She held on. Miles away, in a forest on the other side of the valley, a 15-year-old boy named Samuel was lost. He had gone hiking that afternoon with a group from his school, a nature excursion that was supposed to be educational and team building. But Samuel had wandered off the trail, distracted by a bird he wanted to photograph, and by the time he realized he was alone, the trail was nowhere to be found. He walked in circles for hours, panic rising in his chest, as the sun set and the storm rolled in and the forest turned from friendly to threatening. His phone died around 7 o'clock. He had been using it to try to navigate, but the battery was old and the cold drained it faster than he expected. He watched the screen go black and felt real fear for the first time in his life. He was wearing a jacket, but not a warm enough one. His shoes were good for hiking, but not for snow. He had no flashlight, no map, no way to call for help. He walked. That was all he could do. He picked a direction and walked, hoping he would find a road, a house, anything that could save him. But the forest seemed endless, the trees all identical in the darkness, the snow erasing any landmarks he might have used. He was shivering so hard his teeth were chattering. His hands were buried in his armpits, trying to stay warm. His mind was starting to play tricks on him, showing shapes in the darkness that weren't there. Samuel was not particularly religious. His family went to church on holidays, but he had never thought much about God or prayer or any of that. Faith was something his grandmother talked about, something from another generation. But alone in the forest, with no one to hear him and no way out, he found himself doing something he had never done seriously before. He prayed. "I don't know if anyone's listening," he whispered, his breath fogging in front of his face. "But I'm really scared. I don't want to die out here. Please, if there's something out there, anything, please help me. Show me where to go." He kept walking, waiting for something to happen, waiting for nothing to happen, not knowing which was more likely. The storm was getting worse. The wind was cutting through his jacket. He could feel his toes going numb in his shoes. And then he felt it. A pull. That was the only way he could describe it later. Not a sound, not a vision, but a physical sensation, like something was tugging at his chest, urging him to turn left, to walk toward a faint light he could barely see through the trees. It made no sense. The light was far away, maybe just a reflection, maybe nothing at all. But the pull was insistent, undeniable, as real as the cold on his skin. "Go that way, now." The voice came from inside him, the same way Alina had heard hers. Not his own thoughts, but something deeper, something that seemed to know more than he did. He followed it. He pushed through branches that scratched his face. He climbed over fallen logs and slipped in snow that came up to his knees. The light grew brighter as he walked, or maybe his eyes adjusted, or maybe he was just hallucinating. He didn't know. He didn't care. He just kept moving toward it. And then the trees ended, and he saw a small house, barely visible in the storm, with a porch and a gate, and what looked like a shape lying on the ground in front of it. He ran, his feet slipped and he fell, got up, ran again. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A person, an old woman, lying in the snow, not moving. Ma'am, can you hear me?" He dropped to his knees beside her. Her face was pale, her lips blue, her eyes closed. For a terrible moment he thought she was dead. But then she moved, just slightly, a tremor passing through her body, and her eyes opened. She looked at him like she was seeing a ghost. Her lips moved, trying to form words. He leaned closer to hear. "Did someone send you?" Samuel didn't understand the question. He didn't know how to explain the voice he had heard, the pull he had felt. He just nodded. "A voice told me to walk this way," he said. I think I was supposed to find you." He didn't wait for a response. He half carried, half dragged her onto the porch, out of the worst of the snow. The front door was unlocked, and he managed to get her inside, to the couch in the living room where the fire had died down to embers. He found blankets and wrapped them around her. He found the landline phone in the kitchen and called emergency services, describing the situation as best he could, giving them the address from a piece of mail he found on the counter. Then he sat with her, holding her frozen hand in both of his, rubbing it to try to bring warmth back. He talked to her because he remembered hearing somewhere that you were supposed to keep hypothermia victims awake. He told her about his school, about the hike, about how stupid he had been to wander off. He told her about his grandmother, who reminded him of her, who had the same silver hair and the same kind eyes. He told her his name was Samuel, and that he was 15 years old, and that he was terrified, but also strangely certain that everything was going to be okay. "Stay with me," he kept saying. "Stay with me. Help is coming. Just stay with me." She looked at him through half-closed eyes, this boy she had never met, this stranger who had appeared from nowhere to save her life. She saw snow melting in his dark hair. She saw fear on his young face, but also determination, also something that looked like purpose. And she knew, with the same certainty that had filled her heart in the snow, that this was not an accident, that the voice she had heard and the voice he had heard were the same voice. That they had been brought together by something neither of them fully understood. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." The paramedics arrived 45 minutes later. They were amazed that she was still alive. The lead paramedic, A woman who had been doing this job for 20 years told Samuel that he had saved Alina's life. 10 more minutes out there, she said, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. You found her just in time. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what the paramedics had suspected. Alina had severe hypothermia and a fractured hip. She would need surgery and weeks of rehabilitation. But she was alive. Against all odds, against the storm and the cold and the hours lying in the snow, she was alive. Samuel's parents came to the hospital that night, frantic with worry, having spent hours searching for him. They hugged him and cried and demanded to know how he had found his way out of the forest. He tried to explain, but the words sounded strange even to him. A feeling, a pull, a voice telling him to walk toward a light. They looked at him like they weren't sure whether to believe him or take him for a psychological evaluation. Alina's children arrived 3 days later. They came with flowers and tears and excuses, an endless stream of explanations for why they hadn't visited, why they hadn't called, why they had left her alone in a house 3 hours away while they lived their busy, important lives. Carlos said work had been overwhelming, that the business was expanding and he couldn't get away. Lucia said she had been dealing with issues with the twins, problems at school, nothing serious but time-consuming. Miguel said he had meant to call, had meant to visit, had thought about her every day but somehow never managed to actually do anything about it. They huddled around her hospital bed, these 3 adults she had raised from infancy, and they said all the right things. They said how sorry they were. They said how scared they had been when they got the call. They said how grateful they were that she was okay. Alina listened. She listened to every word, and she felt something inside her shift. For months, she had carried anger and hurt and betrayal like stones in her chest. She had replayed their cruelty in her mind, had imagined confrontations where she told them exactly what she thought of them, had fantasized about cutting them out of her life completely. But lying in that hospital bed, looking at their guilty faces, she felt none of that. She felt something else, something quieter, something that might have been forgiveness, or might have been acceptance, or might have been simply the recognition that holding on to pain was killing her faster than the cold ever could. "You didn't save me," she said softly. The 3 of them looked at each other, confused. "Mom," Lucia began. "God saved me," Alina continued. "He sent a stranger, a 15-year-old boy I had never met, walking through a forest in a storm, following a voice he couldn't explain. He found me when my own blood had left me alone." She saw the shame on their faces. She saw the tears starting in Lucia's eyes, the tightening of Miguel's jaw, the way Carlos looked down at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and because you need to understand something. Family is not about blood. Family is not about whose name is on a piece of paper. Family is about who shows up, who holds your hand in the darkness, who doesn't let go even when it would be easier to walk away." She paused, gathering strength for what she needed to say next. "I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. But I don't need you anymore. Not the way I thought I did. I spent my whole life giving everything I had to you, to your children, to this family I built with your father. And when I needed you most, you weren't there. I almost died alone in the snow because you were too busy, too distracted, too convinced that I would always be fine on my own." Lucia was crying openly now. Miguel wiped his eyes. Carlos just stood there, frozen, looking at his mother like he was seeing her for the first time. "A boy I had never met saved my life," Alina said. "And he's been here every day since. He sits with me. He talks to me. He treats me like I matter. That's what family looks like. That's what love looks like. And if you want to be part of my life going forward, you're going to have to learn what he already knows." She didn't kick them out. She didn't tell them she never wanted to see them again. That wasn't who she was, and almost dying hadn't changed that. But something had shifted between them, something fundamental and permanent. The old dynamic, the one where she gave and they took and took, was over. Whatever came next would have to be built on something new. Samuel visited her every day for the next 2 weeks. He took the bus from his school, an hour each way, just to sit with her and talk. He told her about his classes, his friends, his dreams of becoming a veterinarian one day. She told him about Roberto, about her childhood in Mexico, about the mango tree and the bread her mother used to bake. They laughed together. They sat in comfortable silence together. They became, in the space of those 2 weeks, something neither of them had expected. They became family. Alina recovered slowly. The hip surgery was successful, but the rehabilitation was long and difficult. She had to learn to walk again, using first a walker, then a cane. She spent weeks in physical therapy, pushing through pain and frustration. But she kept going because now she had something to keep going for. She moved back to the city after her recovery. Not to her old house, which her children had sold while she was in the hospital, but to a small apartment in a neighborhood where she knew people, where she could walk to church and to the market and to the park where old women gathered to feed pigeons and talk about their grandchildren. Samuel visited her every weekend without fail. Sometimes he brought his grandmother, and the two old women would sit together drinking coffee and comparing notes on how the world had changed since they were young. Sometimes he came alone, and Alina would teach him how to cook, the way she had taught her own grandchildren years ago, the way no one had ever seemed to appreciate. Her relationship with her children improved slowly. They visited more often now. They called more frequently. They seemed, for the first time in years, to actually see her as a person rather than an obligation. Lucia apologized, really apologized, not just the empty words, but the kind that came with tears and genuine remorse. Miguel started bringing his daughters to visit, and Alina watched them rediscover the grandmother they had forgotten. Even Carlos, the most distant of the three, began to change. He paid back the money from the mortgage, finally, after all those years. He told her he was sorry for everything. He told her he loved her. Alina forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because she deserved the freedom that came with letting go. She understood now that forgiveness wasn't about the other person. It was about refusing to carry poison in your heart for the rest of your life. But it was Samuel who became her true legacy. He graduated high school and went to college to study veterinary medicine, just like he had dreamed. Alina went to his graduation and cried the same tears she had cried at Miguel's graduation 30 years ago. When he got into a competitive veterinary program across the country, he called her first, before his own parents, to share the news. When he struggled with exams or relationships or the overwhelming stress of trying to build a life, he called her for advice, and she gave it the way only a grandmother could, with love and wisdom, and the occasional stern reminder that he was capable of more than he knew. He became the grandson she had always wished for, not by blood, but by something stronger, by the strange and miraculous circumstance that had brought them together on the coldest night of her life, by the voice that had spoken to both of them from the same source, leading them to each other when everything else had failed. Alina lived to see her 85th birthday. She spent it in her little apartment, surrounded by people who loved her, people who had stayed when it mattered. Samuel was there, now a young veterinarian with a practice of his own. Her children were there, humbled and changed. Her grandchildren were there, the ones who had once forgotten her but had now made room for her in their lives again. She blew out the candles and made a wish that had already come true. That night, after everyone had gone home, she sat by her window and looked out at the city lights. She thought about Roberto. She thought about the storm. She thought about the boy who had appeared from nowhere, guided by a voice neither of them could explain. She whispered a quiet thank you, the same prayer she had whispered every night since the night she almost died. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for sending help. Thank you for teaching me that family is not always the people who share your blood, but sometimes the strangers who show up when no one else will. Somewhere across the city, Samuel was finishing up at his clinic, caring for a sick dog whose owner couldn't afford the full treatment. He didn't charge her the extra cost. He just did what needed to be done because that was who he was, because that was what Alina had taught him. He looked up at the sky through the clinic window and smiled. He didn't know why. He just felt, for a moment, like someone was watching over him, someone who loved him, someone who was proud. And in that moment, separated by miles but connected by something deeper than distance, the old woman and the young man both felt the same thing. A warmth, a presence, a hand on their hearts saying, "You are not alone. You were never alone. You will never be alone." If you're reading this story, I want you to understand something. This is not just about Alina. This is not just about Samuel. This is about every person who has ever felt abandoned by the people who were supposed to love them. This is about every person who has ever prayed in the darkness and wondered if anyone was listening. This is about every person who has ever given everything to their family only to find themselves forgotten. You are not forgotten. There is something watching over you right now as you read these words. There is something that sees your pain, your loneliness, your fear of dying without being loved. And that something is moving pieces you cannot see, preparing help you cannot imagine, answering prayers you haven't even finished speaking. Maybe your family has failed you. Maybe the people who should have been there weren't. Maybe you're lying in your own kind of cold, wondering if anyone cares whether you live or die. Hold on, help is coming. I don't know what form it will take. I don't know if it will be a stranger or a friend or a moment of grace you don't expect. But it's coming. It's always coming. Because the same voice that spoke to Alina on that frozen night, the same voice that guided Samuel through the forest, that voice is still speaking. It speaks to everyone who asks. It speaks to everyone who has the courage to believe that they are worth saving. You are worth saving. You are worth loving. You are worth more than the people who left you behind could ever understand. And one day, maybe sooner than you think, you will sit by a window and whisper your own thank you for the warmth that came when you needed it most. For the unexpected angel who heard the same voice you did. For the miracle that proved, once and for all, that you were never truly alone. That day is coming, I promise you. Hold on until it arrives.